One of my favorite memories growing up was my father telling me that Joseph Campbell wrote that when you had a series of coincidences happening in your life, it meant that you were on your true path. This gave my life a sense of meaning and purpose and set me out into the world searching for what that adventure might be. Like many of you, I feel this most strongly when I travel, that sense of possibility. I like to express this by getting lost in a city, stumbling upon a bookstore, stumbling upon a book, and then reading it as if it were written just to me. One summer, when I had the opportunity to live in Paris, that book was Playing the Moldovans at Tennis by Tony Hawks. He's a British comedian. Anybody know him? Books that he writes are about bets that his friends engage him on and the hilarity that ensues. So I wrote to all of my friends asking them to challenge me on adventures while I was going to live in Paris. That was how I went to clown school, but that's a story for a different time. This story is about V. I had met V when I was working at a Jamaican Thai fusion restaurant in Brooklyn called True Bliss. V was struggling to make it as a musician in New York, and True Bliss was struggling to make it as a restaurant, quite frankly. He had worked out a will work for food arrangement, so he would play his folk music during jazz brunch, and they would pay him in green Thai curried goat. Some Sundays I was his only audience member, and it was a sign that the restaurant was about to close. And it did, and we went our separate ways and had lost track of each other until years later when I issued this challenge. V told me that I should look up some of his jazz musician friends who lived in France. Now, this may not sound like much of an adventure, but V knew I'm intimidated by musicians. I'm intimidated especially by jazz musicians. And French has been the challenge of my lifetime. So phoning up a French jazz musician to ask if he wanted to hang out was pretty well up there for me. I managed it and somehow communicated to Thierry that we would meet and where and when, and he and his wife would be waiting for me. We would go see a show. I was still disoriented in Paris, and I showed up half an hour late, and I was mortified. Tried to explain my contriteness with volume when I arrived, saying, "Je suis très désolée, mais j'étais en retard. Il y avait un gros queue là-bas, il ne savait pas." Which I was trying to say, "I'm so sorry, there was this giant line back there, I didn't know it was going to be," but what I had said in Parisian slang was, "Two perfect strangers. I am so sorry that I'm late, but there was a giant cock back there that I had to stand on for like half an hour." Luckily, my lack of couth endeared me to them. And they took care of me that summer. They fed me. They teased me about giant cocks. They took me to jazz shows, and they told me stories about their friend V, who I hadn't really known all that well. But hearing these stories about him through the eyes of these friends that clearly loved him so much, it made me fall in love with him too. And I started thinking about it. Really, it was a coincidence that I was in Paris. I had happened to host the exchange student from France that year at Prospective Student Day. She had happened to get a job and happened to need a sublet that summer. I'd happened to be in New York in the first place. That was because my housemate, when I lived in Costa Rica back when I was in college, had happened to have a housemate leave and needed a roommate at a time when I needed a new place, a new adventure in my life. I happened to be working at True Bliss. I happened to believe in coincidences. I happened to be going to Montreal in a couple months. So on a whim, I called V and I asked him to meet me there. We made a date at Le Chat Noir at 7 p.m. We were to speak only French. He walked in. We had that spark of recognition. He sat down. We didn't even talk until the waiter came. And when the waiter came and took our order, I don't know who was more horrified than who at someone's lack of vocabulary and someone else's terrible accent. What Bea and I shared in common was aspirational French. And it turned out that we fought about everything. We fought all weekend long through my friend's wedding, culminating in being asked to leave the reception because Bea wouldn't stop fighting with the bride's drunken uncle, who wouldn't stop teasing him about something that had happened at the wedding earlier that day. You see, even though I was raised Catholic, I've never mastered when it is that you're supposed to stand and when you're supposed to sit in a Catholic mass. And this priest, he seemed to like to use a lot of metaphorical language. So he kept talking about how we as the congregation should lift up the bride and groom and rise up in our thoughts. And I dutifully stood every time he said this. And Bea, not being Catholic and relying on me as his cultural ambassador, would stand as well. By the end, everyone was laughing at us. And what I started to learn about Bea was that being cool was very important to him. And what he started learning about me is that cool is not my strong suit. He told me at the end of the weekend that things never would have worked out with us anyway, because I emit too much heat off the top of my head. But he also told me that he came on this trip because he was swept away by this idea that I had, that coincidences could tell you that you're on your true path, and he loved seeing himself in that vision. You know, you're part of somebody's epic grand life plan. And he told me he hoped I never would lose that. And I haven't, although what I have is probably better described by the term apophenia, which means a willingness to see patterns in randomness. And incidentally, I can't find anywhere that Joseph Campbell actually wrote anything about coincidences pointing people on their true path. Now, I don't know if this is because I'm an unskilled researcher today, or because my father was a sloppy reader then, or I misremembered over the years, but maybe you won't be surprised to know that I also think of that as a happy accident. Thank you.